Alright, so the last thing to do, I'm going to unmute my... Come on. Hit play. Last thing we did is we made the audio, so it, it jumps, and I've got the little puffs of smoke coming up from the butt. The game's not particularly challenging, and a big part of the reason for that is because the enemies kind of suck. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to go ahead and try to make the enemies a little bit more advanced, give them a sort of AI. I'm doing air quotes. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to mute the audio now. So, we currently have this enemy patrolling, which is this guy right here. And I am going to get rid of him. This is going to be, we'll get rid of that guy, and that guy, and that guy. That's all the enemies. Okay, good. And let's go to scene so I can see what I'm doing here. And I guess we'll just drop them right here. Okay. So let's see what we have for sprites. And okay. I'm just going to use this button as my graphic because I can still tell which direction it's going, even though it's not going to be that great. That'll give me something. So we're going to go ahead and create, and I'm just going to create a 2D object and a sprite. We're going to do something a little bit more advanced. If you remember the old, let me undo stuff so you can see it. Here we go. The old enemy, if you remember, what we did is we basically just put a really simple script on the guy itself. On this guy, and all it does is it has a speed, and then it just says if you run into something that's the block that we put this this tag on here, this enemy block, if it sees that, it just turns around and goes the other way. So it's based on these things being moving, right, or being moved, which is good because it gives you flexibility, but all he does is like a Goomba go back and forth. We're going to do something a bit more advanced than that, okay? So something that's a little smarter. So let's go ahead and do it. So create 2D sprite, and we'll just call this enemy. Let's call it enemy. It's fine. Okay. And for the sprite, I'm at the little thing here, and I'm just going to choose the button. You should choose what your actual sprite graphic is. I'm just not going to do that because, click on that. I'm just going to scale him down. Come on. All right, cool. I'm scale him down a little bit because he's a little bit too big. And I'll move him down, and we just need to add some other stuff to him. So I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to add physics 2D. He's going to need a box collider, right, so that he has something to collide with. We're actually not going to use triggers on this guy. And we're going to add another physics component, and that's going to be the Rigidbody. And that is, I need to add that because I'm going to use that in order to leverage his position. I'm going to go ahead and freeze his rotation so he doesn't accidentally rotate. And I think that is all I need currently. Yeah, I think that's all we need. Some other things we need to make sure that you have is, one, these objects here, any platform that you have need to have a ground layer mask. Okay, so currently they do not. Oddly enough, that character is not set. Okay, so make sure that that is ground. I'll just grab all of them. Actually, I don't know which one's which, so grab this and make sure. Oh, it says ground. Okay. That one doesn't, though. Ground. Yeah. And oops, not UI. Ground. Okay. Oh, this one too. And this one already says ground. Good. Okay. So make sure that those all say ground for the layer mask. And just as a reminder, to create a layer mask, you just go layer, add layer, and then you just type in the next one, the layer you want, and that you want. And in this case, I already wrote ground, so that one's already set up. Okay. But then after you're done with that, you have to go back to the sprite itself because it'll still be set to default. And that is this back one. And then you have to choose ground. It won't actually do it. So we actually have to also set that up to the player, because what we're going to do is we're going to use ray tracing on this object to read the player, not a collider. And what that's going to mean is, in order to read the ray tracing, it's going to look for a layer mask. We're going to utilize a layer mask. We actually need to add another one to the player itself. So just go, actually, click on him and hit open. You want to make sure you hit open, because otherwise what will happen is we'll add a layer mask, but it'll be only to this instance of the player and not to wherever the player's used. And obviously we're going to use this player on every level, so this will, otherwise you'd have to do it on every level. This way we'll do it here, and it will populate to the other, wherever else this prefab is utilized. So make sure you hit open, go to layer, and then we're going to add a layer, and then you're going to choose, we're just going to call it player, right? I'm going to click over here, click back on player. You can see it didn't actually add it. Now choose player, and then, yeah, just go ahead and say yes, change children. Hit this little arrow, and now you're back out, and you can see now he has that layer player, okay? Because that's one of the things we're going to use in order to make that that work, okay? So, next thing to do is this. We're going to go, and I want you to, if you don't already have one, I already have one called Enemy Controller Script. I'm just going to go ahead and open that up, and we are going to spend quite a bit of time on this. We're basically going to delete everything that we made, and you can see how simple this is. The script we're going to write is going to be much more complicated. This will be probably the most complicated script we've written, but it will add quite a bit to the game. All right, so yeah, so we're going to remove a bunch of this and then keep some of it, but for the most part we'll remove it. So this void on trigger enter 2D, I don't need any of that, so we're going to get rid of that. Okay. This move I'm going to leave, but we are going to change some of this code. All right, so we'll come back to that. Okay, so the way I want to set this up is I'm going to set up basically kind of like a state machine, and we're going to set it up that we're going to have different states for the enemy to be in. So we'll have a state where it's patrolling, we'll have a state where it's chasing the player, we'll have a state where it's attacking the player, we'll have a state where it's shooting the player, where it's throwing things. And I don't remember if there's any other ones, but we're basically going to have these states, and what we'll do is we'll just have parameters in order for these states to happen, right? So we'll say, oh, if these certain things happen, then the enemy should be in this state. If these things happen, the enemy should be in this state, and so on and so forth, okay? So basically we're going to set up like a state machine and like a trigger system, okay? That's the idea behind it. So let's go ahead and set up the state machine. We'll lay those out so that way we know what we're making. So we're going to do a void, and I'm just going to call it an AI brain, and I don't know why it's in quotes. That's weird. Okay, AI brain. Okay, and we're going to set up this. Okay. So basically, this is going to be our system. Now, what we're going to do is that you're probably familiar, we have in the past done if-then-else statements, or if-else statements, and it just says, if something happens, this should happen. What we're going to do now is something very similar. We're going to use a switch statement. And the idea here is that if there's a bunch of different options, you can just list them out, and it's kind of a cleaner way of working. So we're going to do a switch. And the thing we're going to test is going to be the enemy state, okay? And so we'll make this variable. So actually, let's go ahead and make it up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do, we'll just put it in the middle here. I'm just going to do a public public string enemy state. And I'm going to set it initially equal to patrol, okay? And that way it's and semicolon. So its initial thing is it's going to want to patrol, okay? So enemy state. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a switch. We're going to say enemy state is a thing we're going to test against, and we're going to say if enemy state basically you put in a block, right? So everything that's in this block will be tested against that. So we're going to say if enemy state, so in this case it's case, if it is patrol, which is what it's going to be initially, okay? It's kind of a weird, it's got kind of a weird syntax here. We're going to say run patrol. We're going to have a, okay, cool. Run patrol. We're going to run patrol, which is going to be the script, the function we're going to want to run. And then after that, you have to say break, which just means run it and then be done with it. We also need to make a default case, so which just basically is what happens if none of it's the else of an if statement. So we're just going to say default, and we're just going to do break. So we're not going to have anything set up for default. Okay. So it's asking for patrol. That obviously isn't a thing yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and comment that out, but that's what we're going to have it do. So we'll do another case. And this one will be chase. So, because we might want it to, when it sees the player, we want it to chase after the player. And I'm just going to do another function. We're going to call this one chase, or cached asset bundle. Chase, okay. And again, break. We have to do break after each one of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out, because we'll come back to that. Then we'll do a case, and we'll just do another one for idle. So basically, if it's not doing anything, we want to just stand still. That will be its idle. And again, I'm just going to do another function. I'm just going to call this one, God bless it, that is so annoying, idle. There it goes. And again, I'm going to comment it out because we didn't make that function yet, but that's what we're gonna call it. And again, break. Oops. Break. And we're going to do another case, and this is going to be melee. Melee is just like fighting. But this is going to be our hand-to-hand, like when it's up against it. And we're just going to call this one, oops, melee attack. So basically, and then break. And I'm just going to go ahead and comment that out. So basically, when it's up on the player, like right next to it, it'll do a melee, like it'll punch or kick or whatever you want to have it do. And then we're going to have one more, and that'll be case. And this one's going to be shoot. So this is going to basically shoot something at the player, and we'll just call this one, let's forward slash shoot attack is what we're going to name that function. And then again, it's going to have to be break. Okay. So basically, what we have here is a switch statement. It's going to test against enemy state, and if enemy state is equal to patrol, it's going to run that patrol function. If it's chase, it's going to run the chase function. If it's idle, it's going to run the idle function, so on and so forth. Okay. And if it's nothing, I guess the default is nothing, but the default isn't going to be that anyways because I already have that set up here. Okay. So that's good. Now let's also, where I did public, oh, I already did make, okay, good. I didn't remember if I did that or not. Okay, so that's good. And we're going to want to run that on every update, okay? And actually, let's go ahead and remove this move. So to remove, and we're gonna run AI brain on every update. That way, it's always running this and seeing if it's changing in some way. Okay. Now the other thing I want to do is set up a trigger system for the AI. Okay. So after this one, we're going to do void AI, and we're going to call it trigger. All right. And basically, this is the thing that's going to do the testing as to sorry, let's call it AI. Oops. So annoying. Can I just grab the last thing, or there you go. AI triggers. This is going to basically trigger these things. It's going to turn these on. Okay, so we're going to have like different things that need to be on, and then when they're on, it'll say, oh, make enemy state patrol, make enemy state case or chase, right? Now we could just put them right inside of this, but I like kind of this setup because that way it's very clean. I can kind of see what each one of the cases are, and I can add more to there. So it's just one of those things. So we're going to do another AI triggers, and that's also going to want to run on every AI triggers. I'm going to want to run that on every update as well, so that way it's always testing for the various triggers. Okay. So that is looking a little bit better. Now what we need to do is make this start working. Okay. So let's set up the patrol, right? So I just want to make it so that the player right now, or the enemy, which is this guy right here, what I want to be able to do is have him basically go back and forth, right? The patrol, which is what we already had set up, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently so that it's a little bit more dynamic and a little bit smarter. And what we're going to do is this. I'm going to set up that the player, or this enemy, is going to have a raycast. It's going to raycast down the ground, and it's going to test for ground. And then basically what I'm having to do is that when it goes over and it doesn't see ground, it's going to be like, oh crap, it's going to turn around and then go this way, and then go, so no ground, turn around, and then go this way. And what that'll allow it to do is that basically you could put it on anything, and as long as there's no ground at some point, which is pretty similar to Mario or a lot of other things, it will automatically know to go back, and I don't have to set up little blockers or anything like that. Okay, so that's the idea behind it. Okay, so in order for that to work, I'm going to need to set up the Raycast. Okay, so let's go ahead and set that up. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to set up. My phone's going off a lot. We're going to set up this inside the triggers, because this is a trigger-like thing, because I'm going to test against the ground all the time. We're going to make a variable that's just going to say whether the ground is present or not. And that is not a variable. So I'm going to put variables I need to get a hold of up here. I'm going to get rid of this private one. I don't need that. So we're going to keep enemy speed. I'm still going to need that one. That's all fine. We actually don't need this, but I like to be able to see it. So I'm going to leave it there. We're going to go ahead and make a private. And if at any time you like something's not working, just switch them from private to public, and then that way you can, at least in the inspector, see if it's functioning or not. But we're going to do a private lowercase, sorry. And it's going to be a bool, and we're just going to say ground present, right? So we're going to say whether, and we'll set it initially equal to false. Okay. So basically, this is just going to be a bool, and then it's just going to say whether we are touching the ground or not. So that is good. Now, inside of our trigger here, we're going to go ahead and we are going to set the value of that ground present to the results of a function we're going to call ground detect. Okay. So let's go ahead and I'll just name it here, and then we'll make it down there. Ground detect, like so. Great. And then we're just going to go ahead and do. Now, you notice that these are all voids. The reason why they're voids is they don't return anything, meaning that they run, but they don't send anything back after they're running. They literally just run through them, and then that's it. In this case, this one is actually going to return. It's actually going to return a value, meaning that when this runs, after it's run, it will be like, I'm worth this, right? So in this case, I want it to be worth something that's a Boolean, because this is going to say true or false. So we're going to go ahead and it's not going to be void. It's actually going to be bool ground detect, like that, and then it will run this function. Okay. So what we're going to need to do is this is going to need to return either true or false. Okay. So but what we're going to do in it is we're going to run a Raycast. Okay. So the Raycast is going to have to be an object that we're going to have to create. Okay. So we're going to go up here, and again, in my private section that I'm not too worried about, I'm just going to do private Raycast hit 2D, and we'll just call it hit, because that's the generic thing that they call it when you when you're in the Unity docs. Okay. Okay, so let's write the script. So it's going to be hit. So we're going to say that hit, that Raycast we're going to make, is going to be a physics 2D Raycast. And I'm going to Raycast, and then it's going to need a couple things. It's going to need a vector to origin and a vector to direction. So in this case, it's going to have to be a new vector 2, because I want to give it both. But I don't want to give it a vector 2. I'm going to decide what the x and the y are. So the we'll just do, actually, you know what? We'll do it this way first so that you can see it. So for the Raycast, it needs a vector2 origin. So we're just going to do transform dot position, which is the position of basically the player. And oh, okay, so position. Okay, it needs more on that apparently. And then, oh, it needs direction too. That's why I forgot. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want it to go downwards. So we're going to do vector2 dot up, and this is like kind of a pre-built thing, but I actually want to go down, so I'm going to do a minus, oops, that's not minus, minus vector2 up. Now some other things I want to do with this as well. Let's go ahead and put a semicolon. That will go ahead and this will run the Raycast, but the problem is that this is gonna store whatever it hits, oops, inside of this Raycast hit variable. The problem is, though, it's going to hit all sorts of things. It's going to hit itself, for that matter. It's going to hit the player. So we actually want to mask out, use layer masks, in order to determine, you know, what we're going to hit. Another thing I want to do is this. So we're just going to go ahead and then do, it wants distance. So let's go ahead and do distance. This is a little bit hard because the problem is that if we do, if I hard code, which means don't use a variable, if I just type in an amount right here, it's not going to be very flexible in case you have different players with different sizes and stuff, because this is going to be shooting from the center of the enemy. So what I'm going to do is actually just go ahead and make a variable to hold that. So we're just going to go ahead and go up here, and in my public section, I'm just going to go public float ground detection distance, like so. So I'm going to use that variable, and that way in the inspector, come on, let me just grab it. No, okay, cool. That's so annoying. Maybe that'll select it, I don't know. So I'm going to put that in there. Oh, it did work. Okay. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to test it against things that I want to hit. So the first one is where it's going to shoot from. The second one is what direction. The third one is how far it's going to shoot. And then the last one is going to be what it's like looking for. Okay. And in this case, I want it to look for the ground. So if you remember in the beginning, I said make sure that everything has this ground mask, okay, or ground layer. So if you go to add layer, don't do this, but you see how it says layer 8, okay, that's important. Okay, so we're going to go back over here, and I need to make a variable that's just basically going to hold that. So up on the top here in my variables, we'll do it after this one. I'm going to make a variable that's basically going to hold it. So again, this is going to be another private, and it's going to be a layer mask type, and I'm just going to call it ground mask, and we're going to give it the value of 1 arrow 8. It's just how they're written. I know it's weird. Okay, so ground mask. I'm just going to go ahead and copy, maybe not. Copy that. Okay. So it's going to test against ground mask. Okay. So basically, it's going to cast a Raycast. It's going to cast it from the position that it is. It's going to cast it downwards. Cool. It's going to cast it downwards. It's going to cast it the ground detection distance, which is currently probably 0 because I didn't put a number in there yet, but I can put a variable there. And then it's going to test against the ground mask. And if that ends up hitting something, then it will basically, you know, go from there. All right. So, in order to kind of see what I'm actually doing, I'm going to go ahead and, this isn't necessary, but I like to do this every time I do one of these to make sure that it's making sense. We're just going to go debug dot draw ray. And we're just going to use the same numbers. It's written not the same way as the other one, but most of the things are there. But it's going to be a new space. Oh, actually, sorry. So it wants the, I'm going to say transform dot position. Transform dot position. So that's where it's going to draw from, which makes sense, right? Then it's going to want this is where it's a little bit weird. I usually put it in parentheses. They're going to want the direction, which is going to be the minus vector vector 2 dot up, right? Which is the same as this one. But it's weird because you write that and then you have to do times this one. Instead of writing it separately, see how there's like a comma, you actually add it to it, which I don't really care for, but it's going to be ground detection distance. Then after that, you choose the color you want it to be. So I'm just going to do color dot yellow. So there are some pre-made ones. I'm just going to go with dot yellow, and then it's going to say how long you want to see it for. Meaning, it says float duration. Basically, oh, you can see right there how long the line will be visible for in seconds. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 0.1 f. Okay, so for that long. And then false just means that if there's anything in front of it, it will still show up. Boom. Okay, and I didn't mean to put a semicolon there. I meant to do a comma. Okay. All right, so that should, basically you want these to be the same settings as these, right? So this transfer position, where it's shooting from is the transform position, and where the vector 2 is, or where how it's shooting is in a vector 2, and instead of them being separate, it's actually multiplied. And then the color of the ray that it's going to draw, how long you're going to be able to see it for, and whether it is whether you can see it no matter what. Okay, so that's good. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to say if, and we're going to say basically if we hit something. So if hit dot collider is not equal to null. So null means nothing. So it means we hit something based on that mask, which means we hit the ground. Then what we're going to do is we're going to return true. Oops, true. Okay. Else we will return false, right? We have to have one. So you notice that it was red for a little while. So basically, it's either going to it has to return something, because see how it says bool? It has to return either a true or false statement. So in this case, it's going to return true if it hits something, and false if it does not. And just to kind of make this a little bit easier to work with, or so we can see whether it's working or not, let's go ahead and change this from a private, the ground present thing. Let's go ahead and make that just public. Okay, that way we know that it's working. And I'm just going to Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac to save it. Go over here, click on the console. Oh, give us an error. So it says name enemy direction is not accessed in the current context, and it's on line 69. 69. Oh, I'm just going to go ahead and remove this move function. We don't need it anyway. Let's go ahead and save it again. Go back here. We're going to actually remake that, but... And good. Okay, so now we got the enemy. Now if you'll notice, though, the enemy doesn't actually have that function on there, so let's go ahead and actually apply it to the enemy. So I'm going to drag it onto the enemy. Hopefully. Did you get over there? I don't think I see it. Let me try it again. Enemy. There. Okay. And you can see enemy speed. We don't need that one, but the ground detection distance. So let's go ahead and make it 1. So it'll be 1 unit. So each one of these is a unit, right? So we'll go ahead and go like that, and let's hit play. And it should drop to the ground. Oh. But you see how it says ground present? So let's do this so I can see both. I'm going to take scene, and I'm just going to click and drag it and that way I can see it from here too. And I'm going to pull this guy up. That way he'll fall, and I'll see that he'll turn on. So you can see it's off by default. We'll hit play, and you can watch it here. He's going to fall, and then see how it turns on. And notice that there's that yellow ray that sticks out. Let me zoom out a little bit here. Okay, so each one of these is apparently a unit. You can see how that ray is basically the size of this box. So it's obviously much larger than I need it to be. And that's why we made it a variable, because that way I can kind of adjust it. So I'm like, okay, that's doesn't need to be that big. Maybe do like 0.1. Let's see what that looks like. Because it's going to be based on the size, because it's shooting it from the center of this. So let's see. 0.1, if you look, is not long enough. So it needs to be about probably almost double that. So let's do 0.25. And then we'll hit play. Because you'll notice that it never actually hit ground because the ray never went past the body. There you go. And now it's enough to go through the collider, and it's hitting the ground. So now our ground detection is officially working. Yay. Alright. And I'm going to call that good because we're at half an hour in this video. And then the next video, what we'll do is we're going to adjust a couple of things with this. And also, maybe while we're at it, we'll do player detection left and right as well, just to get all that stuff done, and that way it'll be set up for later on.